There's an old saying about old soldiers never dying, they just fade away. Well, when it comes to terrorism, they neither die nor fade away. Hi, this is Phil Gursky, President and CEO of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting. Listen to the Quick Hits, short podcast about national security. We here in Canada had some very interesting news this week. The RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, arrested a father and son duet in Toronto. They had found knives and machetes in a hotel room where the pair was holed up. And they've also found a video in which the pair pledges allegiance to ISIS and essentially promises to carry out an act of terrorism. Uh, Not the kind of news you normally get here in Canada. I was pleased to see that the RCMP came right out and said it was ISIS inspired. Whether or not ISIS knew about them is rather irrelevant. In fact, I highly doubt they did. The important thing here is that we had the capability of the federal police force with probably some partners, including most likely my ex colleagues at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service who work in counterterrorism, to provide information to lead to the arrests before anything happened, before any attack, before casualties, deaths, injuries, etc. So kudos to the RCMP. Rather rapid investigation, led to believe, started on July the 1st or thereabouts. Coincidentally, Canada's birthday. That's neither here nor there. The one thing, though, that has caused me a lot of dismay and questioning over the past few days as this story broke is yet one more story that talks about the resurgence, of ISIS, Islamic State. You hear this a lot these days. ISIS once had its caliphate in Iraq and Syria, was defeated by the Americans and their allies, basically completely disappeared from the scene. Former President Donald Trump said they were totally defeated, and we were led to believe that ISIS was yesterday's terrorist group. Well, I got bad news for you. ISIS never did go away, and therefore talking about a resurgence makes no sense because ISIS never desurged or unsurged, or what's the opposite of resurge? I have no idea. Look up in the dictionary. If you've been following the news, as I have been for the past 10 years or so, and even further back when I worked in intelligence, last 30 years, you would draw the inevitable conclusion that, in fact, terrorist groups like ISIS rarely, if ever, go away. They may ebb and flow in terms of activity and in terms of success. Al Qaeda is a good example. They've never achieved or re achieved the success of 9/11, but they certainly haven't gone away. Just ask countries in Africa and the Middle East about that. The Taliban, a listed terrorist entity here in Canada and elsewhere, is now the government in Afghanistan, so they never went away. Even groups like the IRA have remnants in Northern Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland. People who still believe that the entirety of the Irish Isles should be under the Republic and not part of the United Kingdom. The bottom line here is we have this mistaken belief that terrorist causes reach a zenith, so an acme, a sort of a high point, and then through a combination of age, law enforcement slash security intelligence slash military action, or just people moving on, they decide to abandon the cause and then, I don't know, go grow coffee or bake croissant or something. And that is rarely, if ever, the case. This is a good news story people want to hear and they want to believe in, but it is very seldom true. Terrorist groups have causes. They have things they believe in. They have grievances. This is the reason why they form in the first place. And they believe that their grievances slash causes can only be fulfilled or rectified through the use of violence. That's what makes them terrorists in nature as opposed to protest groups or activist groups. And if those grievances slash causes are not resolved to their satisfaction, why would they quit? The cause is still out there. The grievance is still outstanding, which means there will always be somebody, perhaps not the same somebodies, because terrorists are people like us. They are human. They do grow old and die. But what drives them, what led them to form in the first place, is usually something which rarely gets resolved. Now, in some cases, it does. Look at the African National Congress, once considered a terrorist entity, until Nelson Mandela, back in '94, was it? South Africa threw out the yoke of apartheid, and the ANC became the government. So there's a case where a grievance was actually resolved, but grievances are rarely resolved. And for a group like ISIS, whose grievances stretch globally, or Al Qaeda for that matter, they do want to create an Islamist world under their rules, under their interpretation of Islam. That's never going to happen. I hope not, anyhow. I can't see it happening. But until they achieve that, they're not going to stop using violence. So why do we pretend they're going to? Another story that came up recently as well, and it's in the same vein, is this notion that Jemaah Islamiyah, or JI, which is an Islamist-inspired group in Southeast Asia, based in Indonesia. If memory serves me correct, they were once Al-Qaeda linked. The senior members of JI announced recently they have disbanded the group. They're dissolving it. And they claim that they are now committed to Indonesian state and law, and they have boarding schools still called pesantren. That's the Bahasa Indonesian word for it. They would no longer teach terrorism, but Orthodox Islam. And this is being hailed as a great moment. The end of JI, the Bali attacks back in 2002 killed more than 200 people, many of them Australian. JI has been a major presence in Southeast Asia for a very long time. Now, true, they haven't carried out any major attacks since, I believe, 2014. But everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. Yay, JI has seen the light. The leadership has decided that, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. I don't know if jihadis wear t-shirts. It's probably haram under their version of Islam. And we no longer have to worry about them. And all these so-called security experts are saying this. Well, I beg to differ. First and foremost, the JI leadership, some of them may be saying this, but they don't speak for the entirety of JI. There are certainly members of JI who I'm pretty damn sure are going to still plan acts of terrorism in league with their cause, what they believe they have to do to change the world. Secondly, JI is still in control of all these schools. And you're going to try and tell me that this one announcement by JI leadership is going to change the curriculum in all these schools? These pesantrens, these schools in Indonesia, were hotbeds of radicalization in the 2000s and 2010s. I talked to the Indonesians about this when I visited there many years ago with the security service. They are not going to all of a sudden do a complete reversal of their curriculum and become normal Islamic schools. I'm sorry. I refuse to believe that. JI, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, like Boko Haram, like Al-Shabaab, like fill in the blank, Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, the list goes on and on and on and on, do not end their causes. They do not end the use of violence. Yes, they may go through periods where they're less active for a variety of reasons already cited, law enforcement, military, security intelligence actions, but they rarely, if ever, go away for good. And I just wish we'd be more realistic about this. And I'm not saying that we should adopt a sky is falling, cataclysmic, apocalyptic scenario here. But as a former practitioner, my working assumption is that terrorists don't change their minds. If they actually do, I like to see the evidence for that, and not just a statement by senior leadership or some kind of post. I want to see a very long record that they have in fact abandoned the ideology and abandoned the use of violence in the name of that ideology. And until I see that record, spending months and years, I will not be on this campaign that we can stop worrying about JI or ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Al-Shabaab, or, again, there are hundreds of Islamist extremist groups around the world that essentially share the same ideology. They sing from the same song sheet. So the next time you hear something about a resurgence of ISIS or JI disappearing, you might want to take note of that. Follow the news for a little while, as I try to do, and see if in fact those predictions are correct. My sneaking suspicion is that they're not going to be, and we're going to be dealing with the phantom, real phantom, not a ephemeral phantom of Islamist extremism for quite some time. Anyhow, that's what I think. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this notion of a resurgent ISIS and disappearing terrorist groups. You can reach me on email, borealisrisk@gmail.com, or on X @borealissaves. You'll also find me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. If you like this content, want to get more of it, go to the website, borealisthreatandrisk.com. Hit the subscribe button. There's no charge. All the podcasts and blogs are there. You can also follow me on social media. Love to hear what you thought of this podcast as well as other ones. We'll talk again soon. Until then, take care.